They sent the first call for help on the third day. By then, the outer defense line had already collapsed. The drones were gone. The satellite feed was down. The shield grid had failed the night before. Only static filled the comms, and ash filled the sky. There wasn't much left to hope for. The colony of Varela wasn't large. It never made the trade routes, never sat on any rich resource veins. It was the kind of place people went to for quiet, not politics, for clean air, not power, but it had people, families, workers, children, people who built homes on a red soil world with clear blue nights and thought they might finally have peace. And now, the war had come. Not a declaration, not a clash of great fleets, just a slow creeping siege. One by one, nearby outposts went silent. Then the cargo haulers stopped arriving. Then the patrols. Then the stars themselves seemed to pull away. The enemy never identified themselves. They just took one by one. Systems around Varela had fallen. The council argued about it in chambers far away. Sectors debated sanctions. Leaders made statements and resolutions and promises. But no one came. Not to fight. Not to help. Not even to look. Varela was alone. By the fifth day, the sky above the colony turned gray with smoke trails. The kind that didn't come from storms or ships. The kind that came from wreckage. From orbital strikes. From something unseen growing closer. That's when they sent the second message. It was shorter than the first. Less detail, less hope. This is Varela, civilian colony. We are under attack. Repeat, we are under attack. Please respond. Please, cut off. They tried again. And again. Each time the signal was bounced, scattered, lost, or worse, ignored. They had shields, but no weapons. Communications, but no reinforcements. They weren't part of the Council's inner systems. They weren't strategic, not politically valuable, and now not even mentioned. The broadcast log showed their message had passed through 3 relay stations. One in Council space, one in neutral orbit, one on an independent trade route. All 3 marked the message as received. None replied, and still the people waited. Some began digging in, converting food storage into bunkers. Others prayed. Others sat in silence, watching the skies and wondering how long it would be before the end came. One man, an old technician named Karan, climbed the signal tower again on the 6th night. He sat there in a broken chair with a handheld transmitter and spoke into the static. I don't know if anyone can hear me, but we're still here. Just wanted to say that. We're still here. He didn't expect an answer. No one did. But he kept the channel open anyway. Some said it was for his own peace of mind. Others said it was madness. But there was something in his voice that made people stop what they were doing and listen. Even if they didn't say it. They were thinking the same thing. Surely someone would come. Surely someone was listening. They had friends, didn't they? The old Earth Alliance? The former human colonies? Someone? But the stars remained quiet. Ships passed in the distance. Bright dots that left streaks across the night but never slowed. Never changed course. And the people of Varela waited. They waited as the enemy's fleet moved into low orbit. They waited as power stations failed. They waited as their final defense. Drone sent one last image of something enormous passing between it and the sun. They had no illusions anymore. They weren't sending out calls for reinforcements. They were sending out their final words. Not to plead, just to be remembered. Because if no one came, if no one even cared enough to look, then what was left? That night, just before the lights went out, Corin spoke again. His voice was tired, dry, worn down by the quiet. If you're out there, if anyone's out there, I just want you to know, we held on. We held as long as we could. And I hope wherever you are, you'd have done the same. We thought someone would come. Then he set the transmitter down and looked up at the sky. And for a moment it looked like one of the stars was moving, just a flicker. A line, a pulse. But it passed, and he said nothing. because he didn't believe in miracles anymore. He just sat there, in silence, waiting for the dark. The galaxy did not turn away all at once. It did it in pieces. First, with excuses. Then, with silence. And finally, with forgetfulness. Virella's first message had reached several systems. Some heard it and flagged it as low priority. Others classified it under disputed territories. A few simply ignored it. Too far, too small, too uncertain. The Council knew. The data records were clear. The logs showed that the emergency transmission passed through official diplomatic channels. It was received, reviewed, then buried. Some argued in back rooms. What if we respond? What if it's a trap? What if helping them triggers a broader conflict? They talked for hours. Nothing happened. Because the truth was, the colony wasn't worth the cost. Virella had no vote in the inner circle, no defense agreements, no trade contracts with core systems, and most of all, no leverage. There was concern, of course. No one wanted to be seen as heartless, so they issued statements, hollow ones. We are monitoring the situation. Efforts are underway to assess appropriate support. We regret the loss of civilian infrastructure. Regret, assess, monitor. All the words that mean we will do nothing, dressed in official robes. And meanwhile, the skies over Virella darkened. The smaller powers said even less. No one wanted to provoke the attackers. Whoever they were, they had moved with cold precision. No identity, no claims, no banners, just silence and power. Some thought they might be mercenaries. Others believed it was an expansionist front from a rogue system. A few suspected council factions were using proxy forces to clean the outer rim. Quietly. No one really knew. No one really asked. Because asking meant action, and action meant risk. So the debate continued, far from the colony, in chambers filled with light and ceremony, while a world burned unseen on the edge of known space. Few individuals did speak out, a retired admiral, a former human diplomat, a fringe historian who still believed Earth was out there somewhere. They raised their hands and said the words that no one wanted to hear. We should help them. But their voices were too small, their influence too faded, their warnings too late. Across the media circuits, the story flickered for a moment. Outer rim conflict escalates. Civilian world under threat. Then something else happened. A scandal, a market crash, a celebrity trial, and Virella vanished from the cycle. The galaxy watched. Yes, it watched and weighed the cost. And then it looked away. Because Virella was a small world. Because rescue fleets were expensive. Because the problem was far away. And most of all, because no one expected anyone else to do anything. Everyone waited for someone else to act. And while they waited, the enemy landed. No large-scale invasion, no dramatic siege, just a methodical sweep. Facility by facility, relay by relay. One city stopped transmitting, then another, then all of them. The Council updated its records. A red line marked Virella's system as compromised. No condemnation followed. No meeting was called. Just a short, sealed memo added to a growing archive of unsolved incidents on the galactic rim. But someone had seen it. Someone was still listening. Not the Council, not the corporations, not the powers that had ruled the stars for generations. Someone else, someone older, someone who had once been abandoned too. And somewhere, far beyond the reach of the Council, beyond the lanes and laws and maps, something stirred. Not a fleet, not a flag, but a decision. Because while the galaxy weighed outcomes and balanced risk, someone else had made up their mind. And soon, the stars over Virella would shift, not with hope, not with noise, but with motion. And that motion would come not with banners or warnings, but with purpose, because they thought no one would come, and they were wrong. Long ago, Earth fell silent, not from destruction, not from defeat, but by choice. In the aftermath of the border wars, When alliances shattered and humanity stood alone, Earth made a decision no one understood at the time. They pulled back. They shut down the beacons, cut off the trade lines, closed the wormhole gates that had once pulsed with Terran ships and settlers and dreams, and then they disappeared. No surrender, no farewell, just silence. At first, the galaxy watched carefully, waiting for the next move, expecting retaliation. Retaliation never came. Then they waited for desperation. That never came either. In time, the stories changed. Some said Earth was finished, burned out, broken by war and shame. Others claimed the humans had turned inward, fallen into civil collapse. There were always rumors, a ship here, a signal there, but nothing solid. No confirmations, no response. Humanity, once loud, once fiercely present in every galactic forum, became myth. Some laughed at the idea they might return. Others warned that if they did, it would be as something else entirely. No, one really knew what had happened behind the veil of silence Earth had drawn across its corner of the stars. But a few remembered. Old captains who had served beside Terran Marines in forgotten wars, smugglers who once ran weapons along Earth's fractured colonies, archivists who had pieced together fragments from corrupted data caches. They knew one truth. Humanity had not been erased. They had stepped away, and humanity never stepped away without a reason. The question was why, and what they had become in the time since. There were whispers, always, that Earth had used its exile to build something. Not a new empire, not another fleet, something colder, smarter, quieter, a force not meant to conquer, but to respond. Not a standing army, a promise, to themselves, to the few who had stayed loyal, to the ones who had died unanswered, that no one would be left behind again. So while the galaxy forgot, Earth remembered. They remembered the colonies that fell while allies hesitated. They remembered the votes that denied them aid, the trade embargoes masked as diplomacy, the systems that turned away as Earth fought alone. And then, when the war ended, when the smoke cleared, when nothing was left to salvage, Earth did the one thing the galaxy didn't expect. They walked away, and they started writing a different kind of future, one not built on trust in others, but on preparedness. Somewhere, in the shadows between systems, beyond mapped space and known wormholes, they built something. They called it by different names in the records that survived. The Echo Fleet, the Leviathan Line, the Quiet Armada. Its real name didn't matter. What mattered was that it existed. Ships without ports, weapons without nations, a force without politics or ceremony, waiting, not for orders, but for a moment. One signal, one unignorable call for help. And now, after 100 years of silence, that call had come. The logs from Varela had reached deeper than the Council suspected. They had passed through dead zones and buried networks, through old listening posts the galaxy had long forgotten. And deep in the dark, far beyond the star lanes, a single sensor lit up green, a match found, coordinates locked, a message received, and one ship turned. Not with urgency, not with anger, but with certainty. Earth had heard, and they were coming. The sky above Varela had been still for days. Enemy ships hovered in low orbit, silent, calculating. They didn't fire, they didn't speak. They simply watched, like predators pacing outside a sealed room. The colony beneath was quiet now. No more signals, no more speeches, no more hope. The shelters were full, the air thin, and the lights flickered more often than they stayed on. Then, in the deep hours of night, something changed. It began with a flicker in the clouds, a slow pulse of white heat, brief, then gone. A tremor followed. Not from the ground. From the sky, a ripple not visible to the eye but felt, like gravity shifted ever so slightly as if the world had taken a deep breath. Above, the enemy ships reacted. They reoriented. Weapons adjusted. Formation tightened. They had seen it too. Something was coming. Then the stars bent, not visibly, not to most, but to those who watched the sky closely. The patterns shifted. A line appeared between two constellations, where no line had been before, and then it arrived. One ship, massive, dark, silent. It didn't come screaming out of hyperspace. No thunder. No light. It just was, there suddenly, where nothing had been before. Not sleek like modern ships. Not polished or elegant. This ship was a relic, but not rusted, not broken, just old and alive. Its hull was matte black, shaped like a spearhead with faint heat signatures trailing behind it. It bore no flag, no name, just motion. A single pass across the upper atmosphere, slow and deliberate. On the surface, power grids flared for a moment, then stabilized. Static vanished from emergency radios, and for the first time in days, the colony's long-range receiver blinked, a message but not from the ship, from the relay. A single word, inbound, no sender. No ID, just that. Inbound. The enemy responded quickly. 3 ships moved to intercept, breaking from orbit and rising toward the newcomer. Weapons primed, engines surged, they closed the distance fast. The black ship didn't move. Not at first. Then, it shifted, just slightly, as if acknowledging the challenge. And in one breath of light, everything changed. There were no torpedoes, no missiles, no drawn-out exchange of fire, just 3 sharp pulses from the human ship. And then the enemy cruisers were gone, not scattered, erased. 3 flashes in the sky, no sound, no aftermath. Just 3 new scars on the atmosphere, fading fast. The black ship returned to its path, unbothered, unhurried. Above Varela, it took position in geosynchronous orbit, and waited. Down below, the survivors in the shelters looked up. They didn't know what it was, they didn't know who had sent it, but they knew one thing: it wasn't the enemy, and it wasn't the council. It had come alone, and it had come for them. The children were the first to speak. They looked out through the cracks in the reinforced dome and pointed at the dark shape above. It came. They didn't need to be told who it was. The shape said enough. The silence said more. Because whatever that ship was, it hadn't come to talk. It had come to stand between a dying world and the ones who wanted to finish the job. And it didn't care who was watching. The black ship didn't speak. It didn't identify itself. It didn't flash warnings or send coordinates or issue demands. It simply held position, watching, waiting. The enemy fleet shifted uneasily. Their formation restructured. More ships began to rise from the far side of the planet. Heavy carriers, defense screens, strike wings. Dozens of them. The odds had shifted. Heavily. 1 Earth ship. Dozens of enemies. And still, it did not move, it didn't fire, it didn't flinch. Until the second human ship arrived. Like the first, it didn't scream through hyperspace. It unfolded into existence as if it had always been there, cloaked in shadow and heat and silence. Then came a third, a fourth, 10 more. They formed no tight battle group. They didn't arrange themselves in rows. They simply appeared, spreading out like they belonged there, like they owned the space around Varela and had simply returned to reclaim it. On the ground, the people could see them now with their bare eyes. Dark shapes drifting across the sky, blacker than the night, casting thin lines of shadow across the clouds. The shelters buzzed with whispers. It's Earth. It's really them. They came back. No one knew for sure. There were no flags, no insignia, but the older ones remembered. And in those ships they saw the unmistakable shape of old Terran warcraft. Redesigned, upgraded, but familiar, unmistakable. The enemy opened fire. A wall of energy lanced upward from orbit. Dozens of beams, projectiles, missiles, everything. They had, the black ships answered, not with brute force, but with understanding. They didn't block the shots. They bent space around them, redirected, split beams mid-air. A counterstrike so fast, so exact, The enemy ships didn't realize they'd been hit until they were already gone. It wasn't a battle. It was a demonstration. In 15 minutes, half the enemy fleet was gone. Not one civilian on Varela was harmed. Not one structure was touched. The human ships moved with the same kind of discipline soldiers dream of and legends exaggerate. They didn't fight for advantage. They fought like people who already knew how it would end. When the last hostile cruiser broke formation and fled, the human fleet didn't pursue, they didn't hunt, they didn't gloat, they simply stopped. No transmission, no request for thanks. They stayed in orbit for just one more hour, and then they began to leave. One by one, they vanished back into the black. No hyperspace gates, no escorts, just folds in the sky, and then nothing. They had come without permission. They had intervened without orders. They had left without reward. And when the governor of Varela, shaking, still stunned, sent a shortwave signal asking the only question anyone could think of, "Who sent you?" Only one reply came through. No signature, no voice, just a written line. No one. We came because no one else did. That was all. They hadn't come for glory. They hadn't come for politics. They hadn't come to make anyone owe them anything. They came because someone had to and no one else had. The footage spread faster than light. Not officially. The council tried to contain it. But word doesn't stay buried long when the stars themselves have seen it. Within days, the images leaked across networks. A grainy feed of the dark ships hanging. In Varela's sky, flashes of precision strikes, enemy fleets vanishing mid-maneuver, and then silence. Not a single word from the Terran ships. No declarations. No claims. Just one message left behind. We came because no one else did. That line lit fires across the galaxy. On every frontier colony, it was repeated in hushed voices. On every fringe station, it was posted across walls and screens. Some spoke it in reverence, some in fear, some in disbelief. But no one denied it anymore. Earth was back, and they weren't like before. The politicians tried to spin it. They called it an unauthorized military intervention, a violation of council peace codes, a destabilizing event. But the people weren't listening to the council anymore, because the people remembered the last time Earth had been active, before the silence. They remembered the wars, yes, the fire, the force. But they also remembered the loyalty, the commitment, the stubborn, reckless way humanity had stood up for others, even when it cost them everything. And now, they'd done it again, without a flag, without allies, without permission, just because someone needed them. And they answered. Small colonies on the edge of mapped space began broadcasting on old Terran frequencies again, just in case. Merchants started painting parts of their hulls black, in the shape of those warships, not to deceive, but to remember. And in the old academies, historians pulled files out of the restricted archives, the ones stamped with Terran seals buried under layers of forgotten policy, records from the last Earth wars, old testimonies, fragments of code from something called the Leviathan Protocol, a defensive measure, a fleet built not for conquest, but for response, for last resorts, for the cries that went unanswered. Few believed it had ever been activated, until now. Now they were sure, and the debate changed. Not, did Earth come back? But what will they do next? Some wanted to reach out, to re-establish communication, to build bridges. Others, older and wiser, said it was too late for that. They're not looking to talk, one retired general said on a live feed. They're watching, listening, waiting. And if you don't want them at your doorstep, don't give them a reason. And so fear spread, yes, but not the kind born of invasion. Something else. Reverence. A quiet understanding that somewhere out in the black, someone was still out there who didn't need a treaty to act, who didn't weigh odds before stepping in, who didn't look the other way when the weak were left to fall. Earth had gone silent for a century, And in that time, the galaxy had grown, comfortable with silence. But now the silence had been broken, and in its place was a presence. Not loud, not boastful, just steady, watching. Because Varela had not been saved by a fleet, it had been saved by a promise, a quiet one, made long ago by a people who once knew what it felt like to call for help and hear nothing but the void. And now, they were making sure no one else would go through that again. Long after the last of the warships vanished, something remained, not in orbit, not on the battlefield, but inside the colony's communication array. Technicians discovered it by accident, a dormant packet buried beneath old code, no signal, no encryption, just a single file marked only by a simple word, listen. They opened it. It wasn't a speech, it wasn't a threat, it was a collection, audio clips, short videos, text logs, fragments of old transmissions pulled from colonies long dead. Places like Virella, forgotten, abandoned, erased from the galactic record. In one, a child's voice cried out for help, trapped in a broken shelter on a frozen moon. In another, a medic repeated the same emergency code for 6 straight hours, even as her voice failed. Some were silent, cut off mid-sentence, others ended with static. They weren't stories, they were memories. Memories no one else had kept, memories the galaxy had chosen to forget. And now, Earth had given them back. Not to shame, not to accuse, but to remind that behind every low-priority incident were people. And those people had names, faces, families. They had lives before the silence swallowed them. And voices that should never have been ignored. There was no commentary, no music, no editing, just raw, human sound. And at the end of the file, one final message played. A simple voice. Old, calm, measured. We remember what it felt like to be forgotten. We remember calling for help and hearing nothing. That is why we came. No politics, no orders. Only this. When the cry comes again and no one moves, we will. That was all. No code to trace. No data signature, just silence after. But it was the kind of silence that lingered, that settled deep in the chest and refused to be shaken. The people of Virella copied the message, not just for themselves, but for the worlds beyond. Within days, it had spread across fringe systems, deep stations, remote outposts, places that had never expected anyone to come for them, and now, they had hope that someone might. The council tried to manage the narrative. They called the recordings archival anomalies. They said the incident was under review, but the people knew better. They had heard the voice. They had seen the ships. They had felt what it meant when someone came, not because they were asked, but because no one else would. And they knew, without doubt, that Earth had not returned for glory. It had returned to keep a promise. One made in silence, one answered with action, one written not in fire, but in memory. They didn't stay. The black ships never landed. No crews emerged. No flags were raised. No ceremonies held. They came, they acted, and they left, just as quietly as they'd arrived. But Virella was never the same. Not because of what the ships had done, but because of what they hadn't needed to say. They didn't ask for loyalty. They didn't ask for repayment. They didn't ask for recognition. And perhaps that's what struck the deepest chord. In a galaxy where every favor had a price, where every alliance came with demands, humanity had come for nothing. They had stood between destruction and survival. And when the threat was gone, they left behind nothing but peace, and a message that still rang in every heart that had heard it. We came because no one else did. That line was carved into the stone steps of Virella's rebuilt council hall. Not by order, not by decree. Someone just did it. One morning, it was there. No one removed it. No one questioned it. Because it said everything. Weeks passed, then months. Other colonies began to report strange things. A drone, heavily damaged, found repaired and recharged at the edge of its patrol route. A deep space cargo hauler pulled from an asteroid field by an unregistered ship that vanished before anyone could thank it. A distress signal, long thought lost, suddenly rerouted through a forgotten relay and answered by no one visible. Not everywhere. Not always. Just enough. Enough for the stories to spread. Enough for the legend to grow. They began calling them the Starfarers, a name born not of official channels or military designations, but from the mouths of civilians, traders, explorers, those who understood what it meant to be out there in the dark with no one coming, and now someone might. The council tried to take credit. They claimed it was a secret peacekeeping force. They issued vague statements, promised new security protocols, but no one believed them because the Starfarers never answered to the council. They didn't seek power. They didn't intervene in politics. They didn't patrol borders or enforce laws. They only came when silence had stretched too long, when the galaxy had turned its back again. That's when the stars would bend. That's when the old warships would return. Not to punish, not to threaten, but to protect. Quietly, unshakably. Somewhere, beyond the mapped regions, beyond the folded lanes and sensor beacons, humanity waited, not hidden, not lost, just watching, listening. They hadn't built a new empire. They hadn't come back to rejoin the galactic game. They had built something else. A promise made solid, a fleet with no politics, no ambition, only a single guiding rule written into every hull, every core, every ghostly AI that powered their ships. We were left behind once. We will not let it happen again. On Earth, if it still was called that, no signal ever came back. No transmissions, no location, but no one questioned the origin anymore. Because no other force moved like that. No other ships carried that kind of silence. And no other people had once needed the same kind of rescue. Varela became a symbol. Not a capital, not a base. Just a story. The story of a place that cried out. And was answered, not by the council, not by mercenaries, not by allies, but by those who had once cried out too, and heard nothing, and made a vow. In time, other ships would appear. New cries would rise. The galaxy would forget again, turn away. Weigh risk and reward and cost, and the Starfarers would return. They wouldn't ask who was at fault. They wouldn't demand a reason. They would come anyway, because someone had to, and because they remembered. The last line of the old message, left, buried in Varela's archives, only found weeks later, said it best. A quiet line, unsigned but unmistakably human. If you are alone, if you are surrounded, if the stars have turned their backs on you, wait. We're on our way.